from me. I would love to open this up pass this over to our panel, and in particular to Sarah Dexter, who some of you have met certainly in our context, so we're delighted to work with. She is an assistant professor at UVA, University of Virginia, and has been doing research in this area in the continuum of practice, of application. And we're delighted to have her lead this panel, based on her research, as well as the insights that she can provide in working with our panelists. Sarah, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ken. And I'll note I'm an associate professor. That was a hard-earned change of status.
I am sorry.
It's okay. I think many of our guests here today are from academia, so they know what I mean, right? So hello, I'm so pleased to be able to moderate this panel today and to be joined by others who share my enthusiasm for the use of simulations as one mode of preparation for leaders. And we're going to hear from the folks that you see listed on the screen. David DeJong, who is the new dean at Dakota State University. He's got a new role. We're very proud of him. Jennifer Bailey at the University of Texas at Tyler. She's going to share with us her interesting work. Trent Grunmeyer from Drake University. I'm from Iowa too. Trent, I don't know if I ever mentioned that. He's going to share with us work he's done. Some of it was with David, in fact. And finally, Mike Johannick is also going to talk with us about a range of things that he's been involved in from the University of Pennsylvania and started School Sims. Maybe he'll get to share a little bit about his origin story with School Sims. I'm going to lead off today talking about my own work, and then when I'll pass it to everybody else, I'll say a few things, some of their findings. And I'm going to work from the bottom up on these 4 publications that I'm choosing to highlight. The first was really a typology of a lit review, where we identified how different sims provide different kinds of ways that they engage people cognitively, each providing a very context-rich way of thinking about material and interacting with a context. And that work was done in conjunction with at least one of the guests that came today. Davis Clement is here with me. Davis, you can wave your hand. And I don't believe the other co-authors are able to join me, but we've been working as a group where we started off really saying, like, what are we looking at with regards to different kinds of tools? And we characterize digital cases such as e-tips, digital simulations such as School Sims, and clinical simulations done in digital form, such as with immersion, a type of puppeteering that we did role plays with. And next, we moved on, the second bullet from the bottom, what we call part 1 of our study, a needs assessment. We were able to get over 100 institutions from the 600 in the US that prepare school leaders. And what we learned about the typical pedagogy used is that it's at one or the other end of a continuum that we characterized about moving from very classroom-based instruction with text to very field-based instruction, like in internships. And along the route in the middle, we had placed these kinds of digital tools that were characterized in the first article as ways to apply material, but not yet in the field, more in a safe rehearsal space. And what we learned is that a very small percentage of institutions use such tools. And instead, the majority of instruction is conducted through the modalities at either end, text or through field experiences such as internship. Our next study we called part 2, and Ken was generous enough to partner with us and allow a number of volunteer faculty to use School Sims throughout a semester. It happened to be the spring 20 semester. And if y'all remember those days, suddenly we were faced not only with, like, these people had volunteered to do a new kind of interaction, but they needed to be online. And so some of them described it as a blessing in disguise that they had participated in the study. But what we learned from their work is they uniformly describe the benefits that they perceived, chief among them, the authenticity they felt of the experience that students had and their engagement with it. And that any kinds of things that they experiences difficulties, whether it was technical support or and anticipated costs where they need to purchase the materials, or time constraints that they had to invest, they said the benefits outweighed the costs. So we were able to learn how they went about thinking of these as tools and what sorts of things that they encountered in that planning. And lastly, the Part 3 study has been ongoing for the last couple of years at the University of Virginia in our administration and supervision program. We have been collecting data in the 6 courses where we use school sims, e-tips, immersion, and pre-post data with regard to students, leadership, decision-making, self-efficacy, and their impressions of what they learned from the cases, how it impacted their confidence and their certainty about the type of decision they were asked to make. And we, in the paper that will be presented at UCA next week, in case any of you are attending, come and see our session Saturday morning, 8 o'clock. We are going to talk about 2 groups, leadership for teaching and learning, which you can imagine former teachers are very familiar with, and school law, which they are much less familiar with. And so we were able to see that while both groups made gains, they were able to both indicate that they increased their certainty and their confidence. So law was at a lower, decision-making self-efficacy point, and they were able to indicate that they felt they improved. There's a lot more to say, but in the interest of time, I'll just move on to say, next up, we're doing some surveying of students about their topics that they wish they would have had more practice with during internship. So we're going to learn some things about maybe what future simulations should be created, and play that out in a project that I'm working on with another couple people to create a platform for assessment with simulations. And so again, there's a lot more to say about that, but in the interest of time, I'd like to now pass this over. Our first presenter today is Jennifer. And so Jennifer, if you tell us about yourself, where you work, and your work that you're going to present. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sarah. My name is Jennifer Bailey, as Sarah shared, and I am an assistant professor of practice at the University of Texas at Tyler. And if you are not familiar with where Tyler is located, we are 2 hours directly east of Dallas. And so that kind of situates us geographically. I do teach in the graduate programs for principal preparation, and then in curriculum and instruction. Specifically, I do instructional coaching in the CNI department area. And I did just come from the field. I was a campus principal at turnaround campuses and also central office administrator for about 10 years previous, before coming into higher ed 3 years ago. So to share my work, that I am a junior faculty member, so I am getting into this area recently, but I focus specifically in my research on studying how formal and informal learning influences professional growth for school leaders. So the formalized side of that definitely falls under simulations. And my research team and I, we started out this process and first doing a dive into the literature. And so my first article that I wanted to share with you, publication, was recently published in NASSP Bulletin. And this was a Lit review, really focused on providing a contextualized argument for the need for simulation to basically reframe how we are approaching professional development, not only for our aspiring school leaders, but also our current practicing school leaders. And that is what I provided just as 3 points of interest pulling out of the article. That one, we've had multiple surveys in the recent, past 2 years, citing that principal attrition has reached historical levels, and we're actually at higher levels than we are at teacher attrition. And one of the leading reasons for that is a lack of responsive professional development. And so the argument that we provided through this is that simulation practice could provide meaningful learning opportunities and facilitate impactful PD for practicing principals. And one specific area that actually flows into my research paradigm is looking at simulation through the lens of cognitive load theory. And so looking at the aspect that, simulation does provide active practice without the accountability of real-time pressures that principals face. And so that in turn does contribute or could contribute to the development of germane load, or what we would commonly call elaborative schemata, and for our aspiring and practicing leaders. And then we just summed up basically that there is no manual for the principalship, and our attrition data suggests that what we are doing is not working. So we can reimagine professional development, like I mentioned earlier, for our aspiring and practicing leaders by creating a metacognitive playbook through intentional practice. And so this work actually led into our pilot study that we've been working on. We are going to share this also at UCEA next week. Our session is on Friday morning at 8 a.m. And Ken has also been working with us on this too, and with school sims. And this was a mixed method study. So basically what we did overall see that we do have increased overall efficacy in management, instructional leadership, and moral leadership was what we looked at in our survey specifically. We also did align that into cognitive load, which we had increases there as well, and impacts and influences on efficacy through the cognitive load pieces. And then on our qualitative side of the study, our participants did report increased leadership preparedness and then positive influence on metacognitive skills and decision making. And for sake of time, I can't get into all of the amazing things that they did share about that and elaborate in that area, but I will be sharing that at UCEA next week. And then of course, this is a working paper that we hope to push out for publication process as well.
All right, thank you, Jennifer.
Okay.
Next, we're going to hear from David DeJohn. David, would you please introduce yourself and tell us about your work? Thank you.
Hello, thanks everybody. My name is David DeYoung. I'm the Dean of the College of Education at Dakota State University. I just started in June and I love it. Our university is based on innovation and technology, and it's just a good fit for me. So before this, I was an assistant professor and then associate professor and a chair of the Division of Educational Leadership at the University of South Dakota. So during that time, I had to learn how to be a researcher. And I started as a 3rd and 4th grade teacher, then a principal and superintendent for 8 years. And then I had to publish. So the first published manuscript that I had about simulation is with Trent Grenmeyer, that we did a study together, and it's listed up there. And what we really found out, we really focused on the participants and their perceptions after experiencing simulations. And they came back saying, like, these are awesome. Like, we were engaged, and this finally got us really thinking deeply, and it helped us listen to different perspectives, and it kind of built their capacity to lead. And after that, Trent did his study at Drake. I did mine at University of South Dakota, and we came together and we're hearing the same things. And this is not only good for the participants, but it's a good thing to research. Next, study that I got published was with a team at University of South Dakota. And what we did is, there's one of the simulations that is my favorite. It's the disruptive teacher, and it has a female actress in it. Well, School Sims had to use only male actors for one of their clients. So I was like, hey, let me have that. So what I did multiple presentations with my team, and we had half of the group experience a simulation with female actresses, and half of the participants in a different room with male only actors. And then we brought them back together and we had a conversation of, okay, do you treat males differently than females when they bring you concerns? And what we realized through that study is the simulations, they create a natural space that's really safe that you can talk about some pretty sensitive topics. And so we got that published about a year ago. And then the one I'm working on right now, I've been curious to know if simulations can be used in an online only asynchronous setting. So for 7 semesters, I've used school sims and 826 different times they took my in my class, they would experience a sim on their own, and then they would reflect on my discussion boards. And I'm doing a content analysis actually with Sarah Dexter on that study. So that's where I'm at in my role as a researcher with simulations.
Thank you, David. Next, we're going to hear from Mike Johannick. And Mike, please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from and about your work.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here, and it's great to have multiple panelists doing research on simulation. So as Sarah indicated, this is an effort that Ken and I sort of started collaborating and conspiring a number of years ago. Anyway, it's wonderful to learn of the different work going on. I'm a senior fellow at the Grad School of Ed at University of Pennsylvania. I also direct a doctoral program in educational leadership that focuses on and tries to serve and support experienced school leaders. So folks who've been out in the world for a while and come back, and we have the privilege of working with them. And I know it's actually summer on this Zoom, so I've got to be careful I speak correctly about all this. We've also been building out a network in Latin America that has helped us to do some of this work or to do some of this work internationally, including some work years ago in Chile, building a set of simulations with school sims, actually, to build them as a part of the building of the first assessment center, principal assessment center that was developed in Chile as a pre-screen kind of effort for their principal sort of pathways that they were building. You see here the sites and such, and happy to follow up with any questions on the particulars. I thought it might, given just a couple of minutes, set up some sort of aspects of the work that I think are most interesting and promising, and it's great to see so many people engaged in it. One of them is that it seemed to us that simulations, in addition to the kinds of advantages and strengths that are presented, that have been presented so far, is the capacity that the simulations, when built from the experience of veteran leaders, allows us to capture the tacit knowledge that often kind of disappears in the system. So, working with folks who've been leading schools, Jennifer indicated her own experience, and others I know in this call or part of this and on the panel, all that experience to bring folks together so as to construct a simulation that reflects people's years of experience into the nitty-gritty detail where research and practice have to come together. That's actually one of the areas that the sims then give us a scalable tool for our profession that allows us to not lose that. And it also means that we can review each other's simulations. And so we can be thinking about leaders in the field, not solely as people who are using simulations for their own development and formation, but they're becoming authors of these simulations and therefore embedding, if you will, their own learning from the field out into the wider world. In academia, we have lots about peer-reviewed articles and everything else. And the peer review, it seems to me, that is also a fitting addition to that in the field where we're focused on practitioners. Our doctoral program is very much focused on in practice kind of work, practitioner research. This is an opportunity then for us to look at each other's simulations and understand how does that match up? How does that match up with our own experiences, with the research that's existing on that topic and so forth, and refine in a space that forces those kinds of things together. So I think that allows us to share knowledge. It also allows us to do that across boundaries. It also breaks another isolation. So part of that is, it seems to me, the other kind of second issue that is a key one, seems that we hear a lot about with our own students and alumni, has to do with the isolation of the work. You're often alone as a leader in terms of what it is that you need to be doing in your own decision making. How do we break that? Well, this gives us a chance to take that practice, share it with each other, say, this is what I'm looking at. These are the kinds of options I think I'm facing. Here's what I think would happen if I did this. That becomes a very focused form of conversation in the field to break the isolation of our own practice, where we're also just trying to, and you can't necessarily share with your colleagues what you're really thinking about, or what you think might happen if you do the following, and so forth. So that, I think, helps break the isolation. But further, it breaks the isolation of our field in terms of the disciplines at the university. This is highly complex work. It has to do with lots of things having to do with organizational work, psychological aspects, historical context, policy implications, and so forth. This becomes a chance for other disciplines to come in and to collaborate at the point of practice, rather than in their isolated silos. So I think it's a huge opportunity also for higher education to reposition itself in terms of its disciplines, so that the disciplines get refined and disciplined by the practice that they're meant to support. And finally, I think it's a chance for us as a field to move beyond or to complement, I should say, the knowledge, the skills and dispositions kind of paradigm we've had for so many years. Go to a workshop, you need to learn about a new topic. It's important. You got to have a certain level of knowledge. You got to have certain skills. You need to develop certain dispositions and a growth mindset and so forth. End of the day, though, when it happens in your hallway, when it happens at a board meeting that goes sideways, you need to react in that moment. What is that capacity? Can we identify that capacity? So our most recent work, including work that we're doing across some international borders, is to try to get at a gauge of that capacity of judgment that we're calling it, in situ professional judgment. What is that? And that allows us to then also break the isolation by looking at other professions that have been at this for a long time. Ken mentioned pilots. We're working also with medical field, nursing, business, policing, and other fields to say, when you think about judgment and you want to develop it explicitly, what do you understand by that? How do you gauge it? What can we learn from the world of educational leadership that's so distinct and yet has some of that underlying capacity? So I'm not sure if there's time to share this other one. I've talked a little longer than I thought. So the next slide has a brief chart that just to indicate that one of the projects that we're right in the middle of, so if you have any suggestions, we're all ears, is looking at the simulations. We're going to build 2 small simulations for urban elementary school principals in Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and the United States. And it will allow us to construct the sim so as to try to capture people's in the moment thinking, as well as to look at correlations with other kinds of indicators, some that were mentioned already around leadership, self-efficacy, tolerance for ambiguity, empathy, other kinds of indicators, and try to get a picture using the simulation, not just as a point of formation or development, but also as one that allows us to gauge the thinking and break the black box of practice. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm so glad to have so many people interested in this and to hear from such wonderful colleagues. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next, we're going to hear from Trent. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us about your work?
Yeah, it's good to be with everybody this afternoon, and I love to engage around the topic of simulations. Dr. Trent Grunmeyer, Drake University here in Des Moines, Iowa. I'm an associate professor of education leadership and advise our superintendent program at Drake, as well as teach ed leadership, specifically teacher evaluation and school law in a master's program. And then I teach a tech and leadership class in the doctorate program. And I mention that because I'll talk to you about how we've leveraged the sim in some of those different programs. Dr. DeYoung already alluded to a previous study that we did in both of our programs, and then did a perception study that was published in the International Council of Educational Leadership Preparation Journal there. And you can see some of those bullets that we collectively pulled out. But the engagement that our students perceived and really leveraged from the simulations, whether it was the disruptive teacher that David alluded to or some of the others, was really much more highly engaged than a textbook or some of the other class activities, which is always humbling as an instructor, but great to see. We also, the different perspectives, as David alluded to, the sim offered that framework to have those discussions with our students. And then I think most important as we think about preparing leaders for the fields and the unique fields and the post-pandemic and all the challenges that they faced, that confidence to lead because they've had an authentic simulation experience was certainly uncovered in that particular research. Some of the other research I found with kind of as an ancillary piece of another study was simulations actually helps promote long-term retention around a lot of the important concepts and objectives that we aim to deliver on in our courses. And again, that was an ancillary piece in that 2019 study. So I would mention those two, but with the time that I have here, I also want to mention that two other things. I've actually dabbled a little bit in using simulations in the hiring process, which is a little bit unique, and I don't have a whole lot of hard peer-reviewed data to back that up. But I just wanted to mention that as another piece of that's future research that I'd like to think about, but we also explored. And Ken actually came out to my university during a class a few years back, and we actually hooked up some biometric data to students and did a bit of a study on how the students' biometric blood pressure, perspiration, heart rate actually changed as they engaged in a simulation. And just like we've alluded to in some of the qualitative research that we've shared here, we saw a lot of the same things: increased heart rate, confidence after the sim, some perspiration, if I recall correctly, which to me confirmed that it was a very authentic and engaging experience for the students as we prepared them and had leadership for the real deal in the field. And lastly, as I finish up, I just want to tell you how excited I am about the most recent simulation I'm working on with Ken and a small team, and that's around implicit bias in the hiring process. And we hope by the new year, 2023, we're able to share that simulation with a wide audience as well, because I know how meaningful of a topic that will be. So thanks for the opportunity today.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. We have, I'm going to scroll back to the slide that shows all of us who are going to be responding to a couple of questions that we co-developed and tweaked. First, the panel, I'd want to invite you to speculate and to elaborate from your earlier remarks, where you stayed quite specific to your research. And in those remarks, I heard a number of themes about, how Sims contribute to leaders' development. We talked about the safe spaces that they provide for practice and conversation, the way to see insight into one another's minds and thoughts and decisions, a way to make their thinking visible to us as instructors and provide common experiences. And, to build their confidence, and that certainly they're engaging. So if you had your magic wand, that you could wave, and imagine a day where simulations, a variety of types, are developed and widely used in the field of leadership preparation, I'd love for you to speculate and elaborate, to imagine what's the biggest and the best contributions you think these kind of interactive digital tools like Sims can make to leaders' preparation? So if we were able to scale this out, get them widely used across the whole field, what do you anticipate would be some of the benefits, the contributions? And I'll either take volunteers or I'll call on you. Trent.
Sarah, yeah, this actually, I hate to speak twice in a row, but I would actually just mention that I alluded to teaching a dot class on tech and leadership. And one thing we explore every time I teach that class is a horizon report of emergent technologies. And I think that's worth referencing, because as you explore that report, it talks about and is very, very accurate around estimating the time of mainstream adoption for technology initiatives. And I would bring to your attention, or the participants' attention today, that AI and virtual reality type simulations, thank you for the slide there, in the last EDUCAUSE Horizon report there, are actually, I believe they forecast 2 to 3 years away from mainstream adoption. Now, again, that may not be accurate, it's a forecast, but historically it's been pretty accurate. And I think that calls to attention that the students are demanding it. As Ken started our presentation today, he talked about how simulations are used in a lot of other fields like military and medicine. And so this report confirms in my mind that it's coming, and we have to embrace it and leverage it better. The other thing I would just allude to is the pandemic. And I know nobody wants to think about that again, but I will tell you, when we had to pivot and students couldn't be in schools with their clinical experiences quite like they could be without the pandemic, we were able to leverage simulations and still provide authentic, meaningful experiences that I am confident are preparing our school leaders for the field yet, despite the challenges and distractions and disruptions the pandemic caused. So that's what I would offer. I think they're coming to mainstream adoption, and I think regardless of the environments, it's just a best teaching and learning tool.
All right, thank you very much, Trent. Jennifer, please add.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on what Trent said and elaborate a little bit further. And this has come, I think, also thematically from what students have shared in culmination. Also, I think as a practitioner and thinking through a teaching lens is looking at ed leadership programs, and we do practicum experiences for our students. If that's usually a norm measure that they are in the field gaining practicum, but there is an equity and access issue a lot of times within a practicum experience. And it depends a lot of times on, a lot of variables and moving factors of who their mentors are, what campus they're on, what experiences they are getting. There's so many moving parts that there's just some unknowns for some students, whereas others do get more rich experiences than others. And so when we interject or provide simulation into a programmatic structure for them, in looking at it, doing it intentionally in ed leadership preparation, it really peels back the onion layers to provide more equity and access to give them experience that they do need. And students spoke a lot to that in the pilot study that I mentioned, that we've just conducted, and looking at that, what they even talked about their different practicum experiences, and they engaged in the simulation when they were doing practicum, and just the differences that they felt that they got out of engaging in simulation versus what they were getting in practicum, and that it just took it to another level for them. So that was helpful.
That's an interesting point, Jennifer, that I'll just hop on. Long ago, when we developed e-tips, they were first developed for use with teacher preparation. And we found that they described themselves feeling more ready for field experiences because they hadn't really thought about a school in the same way that, they can't come to think about it when they are experienced teachers, as an organization, as a workplace, as a community of learners for adults. And we all, in working with school leaders in preparation, those folks have long been in education, and they don't, have that same need to understand, well, school's an organization, it's a workplace. But we find that many teachers describe that they lift their interpretations of, the kinds of things that they're now not yet part of, but they get some insight to without, they get to feel what it's like without being responsible for what happens. So
Right.
what you say.
And I think that was even most specifically, without providing, reading out the direct lines of quotes that students shared, that they shared a lot of what they were experiencing in practicum. Is the difference between that and simulation is in practicum, I can walk down the hall and see my principal doing things, but I'm not there making the decision and going through the process like I am in the sim, and actually having it on my shoulders and seeing the reaction to the constituents or the stakeholders and how they're responding. Whereas my principal gets to walk that walk every day. I can never do that in a practicum because I'm not in that seat making that decision. Yeah. And so I think that's really, just thinking about that, regardless if they have a great mentor or not, or if they're being exposed or if they're not in their practicum, the simulation just provides an extra advantage point for them to gain, like you said, a side-by-side seat that they would not gain otherwise.
Yeah.
Hi, Sarah. I see David has his hand raised.
Yeah,
David, I'm hijacking the conversation.
Oh, no, that's good. One thing that, as I look for it, I've been able to facilitate simulations to hundreds of simulations to thousands of people in all 50 states. So I have the privilege to kind of like pick up little nuggets from everybody. And the more I use them, there is one thing that just keeps rising to the surface, and that's safety. Now, it's safety in the conversations that I have people go through. So practically speaking, simulations, their format is you have some context, you have a decision point, people commit to an answer, and then they talk. And in those conversations, the power of those conversations has been incredible to me. And I think it's the number one benefit of the simulations. And the second part of the safety aspect is when people experience them on their own in an online asynchronous setting, they're going through them multiple times just to see what would happen. And they'll say, I even tried the crazy answers just to experience like the consequence of a crazy decision in a safe environment. And, you know, as I look to the future of Sims, I mean, I would love to be on a study that dives even deeper on that with people, because, you know, in our culture today, we want leaders that are creating those spaces that to talk about what we really need to talk about as leaders and in society.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. I think so. I agree completely. I think that the safety piece is so important, and there's so many topics that are challenging to talk, and you almost don't want to say what you're thinking, kind of topic. And as long as we're in that space, we're limited as to what we can do and how we can grow. And you know, we've in our own program, we always talk about there's a room in the hotel where people stay during class weekends, and you know, at a certain point in the night, you can start to have other kinds of conversations, and the Merlot has flowed and so forth, and you start to get to it. And frankly, as leaders in such a tough, you know, we throw everything on the schools that we don't know how to solve in other ways in our society. And so that leader becomes somebody who's point on it. And I think to give that space, I think that's tremendous. I think two other things that come to mind. One is that it gives us the chance to say as a field, if we had to list the experiences that every principal coming into the field ought to be able to manage and navigate, and that they're likely to occur within the first 3 years of their service, what would those be? What would those be? And what would the criteria be for how well that's done? I just think that would be a hugely useful thing. I know at our med school, there are 12 simulations. There's a series of 12 simulations that unless you pass those, you don't become a doctor. And they're all reviewed by other faculty and peers and so forth. And so it would force us as a field to get specific about that. And the final thing is that, you know, as I think Jennifer, in your comments, the practica will vary. But if we know there's a certain experience we want to make sure everybody has and feels comfortable in, whether or not you have it in your practical experience, this gives us the chance to say, let's build those into the program through simulation. So you will have that. In the medical world, they've often talked about these low frequency, high mortality kind of situations. You may not get this in your experience in the ER room or whatever your round is. But if you do, in real life, you have a limited period of time in which you need to operate and do that well and make a good decision. Anyway, I just think it would be great, useful as a field for us to put that all on the table and to keep working that conversation about what it is that we think are those essential areas of practice.
I agree. You mentioned that as a field, I concur with that. And also just as an instructor, once, you know, when I hearken back to what we learned from our national study of how do people educate their students, they're, you know, relying a lot on field experiences, but we're not with them. We don't know, did they discern the important points there? Are they reflecting upon them? You know, were certain things recognized as better practice, not as good to emulate? So it provides a much more direct opportunity to highlight things, right? We not only give them uniformity, but then there's a chance to interact with them about the experience that just doesn't happen otherwise. So we've identified a number of benefits through our research and now our discussion. We're talking about, you know, leveraging high impact practices, providing access to a variety of sites, creating that uniformity, making for safe practice experiences. So I think the next logical question is, and what's needed to make this happen? What do you anticipate, what do you imagine is needed in order for the educational leadership field to more widely use these and, you know, accomplish those kinds of benefits that were just described? What's needed? What has to get done? Mike, would you like to start since you're on screen there?
Yeah, I wish I had that secret. First of all, I mean, I think this kind of activity, I think providing research, I don't want to overstate the influence of research on things in terms of institutional practices. But I think having people begin to understand that this is a huge opportunity for our programs. I would think also that frankly, in a situation in which a lot of institutions are worried about their enrollments and their engagement with folks, frankly, and just as an institutional level of institutional self-interest, I think there is an opportunity to say this is something that people will feel and experience in a whole lot of different ways. I think also it's an opportunity to bring in. I'm also thinking about the institutional change of where this needs to happen. And at least just looking at the university and the preparation programs, I think for those looking to do this, the support of other parts of the university is also very helpful. It is clear you could not pretend to have a medical education program without simulations. You couldn't, right? You can't get accreditation. So for us to say we're sending people out into the world and we haven't actually seen them in simulated activities should be something as a professional responsibility. We say, and actually that's not acceptable anymore. We need to set a time period in which that becomes what we do, because that's our responsibility for the people you're in front of. And so I think that becomes a different, and I think that allows us to draw on, frankly, institutionally, other parts of the university that are also well established and have well established histories and traditions in this work.
Thank you.
I'd love to see about it.
Yeah, I'm going to follow that because I think the other thing that will help, you're speaking to the points of policy and accreditation. And I think that complementing, you know, being able to leverage those or pull those levers would be greater measurement models with SIMS, being able to understand with a uniformity, you know, using trace data. So how can you unobtrusively observe people during SIMS, not just what they say, not what they clicked on, but what are the other kinds of ways that we can build a more rich understanding of the student model, some might call it, you know, like how through this task and they're enacting it, are they generating evidence for us to draw some conclusions about what they know, what their skills are, their dispositions, and their judgment. And so I think that is a huge thing that I would wave my magic wand and make happen, is a better set of, you know, understandings. And measurement has quantitative psychology and network measurement is progressing really rapidly and offers a number of really super interesting opportunities. David, tell us your thoughts.
Yep. I think it needs to be more use as we move into the future here. So when I started using simulations, there were 16 of them in the library, and they were just focused on principal preparation. So as the demand started growing, and then it kind of expanded to superintendents and then to counselors. And, you know, what I'm really excited about is the teacher simulation explosion that's happening right now. I mean, if you haven't seen the new teacher sim about a parent-teacher conference, it is fantastic. And I mean, we're talking about a sim that's less than a week old, so I know it's just got dumped into the library. But as soon as this becomes more normalized in all the different fields, and starting with teacher prep, I think the momentum is going to reach the acceleration point that Trent was talking about earlier, when the mainstream eventually adopts this technology.
And Sarah, can I add a couple points real quick, practically here? I think there's two other things, and I've been using them for a while as well, so sometimes I forget this, but whether you're speaking to a donor or an administrator that might have the purse strings just to have the opportunity to use the SIMS, there's nothing, certainly sharing the research is critical, but my experience is that you have to get them to experience it firsthand themselves. They sell themselves. And Ken's always gracious about doing a demo or letting people experience it. But I've found over the course of the years for even a colleague to use it, they just have to experience it firsthand. And then secondly, I found that sometimes you throw out simulation and people think it's an operation and we're going to be really tech heavy. And we all know that have used them. These are easy to use. The technology does not get in the way, and they can have some peace of mind. So the other practical thing I would just share is that you might have to be the guide by the side one time to have a colleague try it or administrator try it, but it only takes once because the technology won't get in the way of the actual learning.
Thanks. I want to catch a remark from Jennifer as well, but I'll just interject here that another thing that you said prompted me to remember this point about diversifying our pedagogy with these sims. I know that David has talked about using them completely online asynchronously, talked about using them in a whole group, talked about using them in individuals. I've used them in pairs. I've heard from another individual that she was talking about immersion, but it applies in the same way of, doing the fishbowl where these folks are engaged, coaches of the person that's in the hot seat, and they tap in and have several people come in. And then, finally, there was yet another one that I forgot. But anyway, the idea of helping us understand and think about what's the cognitive activity that we really want students to gain from this, and then how do we flexibly adapt to use these tools as different kinds of learning experiences. And of course, I would also like to see more types of these tools so that we can have, again, different experiences. The ones that are out there provide very different experiences. I want to let Jennifer go, and then Mike, if we still have time, I'll come back to you. Okay, Jennifer.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and I think that's my piece, and that was really what we started in our work, which I mentioned earlier, is looking at answering this question about what is needed right now, obviously in our preparation programs, utilizing it there, but I think we are also, we can't neglect what's going on in the field and the attrition issues and the data points over and over and over again that we're hearing from principals leaving, and they're saying we are not getting the PD that we need. And that goes back to what you just mentioned, Sarah, and that's why we looked specifically at the lens of the cognitive load piece, because the saying of you don't know what you don't know when you get in the field and you're there. And just like we shared, if we brought principals together, what they learned their first 3 years and wrote that down and then created sims around that, I think back to my first year of the principalship, and I jokingly, but also very seriously told my superintendent, I got 10 years of experience my first year as a principal because I had everything imaginable happen to me. And how do you prepare for that? You don't. You learn as you go. But building your schema off of it and learning things, you're in a vacuum, you're by yourself. Leadership is a very lonely place, like David mentioned early on. And so when you have a sim there that you have some frame of reference coming in and learning, and then you can build off of that knowledge and continue that with that germane load aspect, and then that self-efficacy improves, maybe we can swing that tide back the other direction for our principal retention. And that's really what I think we need to be working on, on a national level. Oh, Sarah, you're on mute.
Classic, forgot to unmute. I was thanking you, Jennifer, for your remarks. Thank you. Ken, I know that you wanted to have some time for questions, and that we've been tracking them in the chat. Should we switch to that, or Mike, did you really want to share your last point, or can you concede?
I can concede. The quickie was just using with colleagues in meetings is the other thing. I think of, in a dean spot or in a K-12 spot, go through a sim with colleagues as a point
Oh, to
as an
spread.
agenda item.
Yeah,
Huh?
help
Yeah,
spread.
just to spread it around and people saying, oh, yeah, that would be interesting.
That's what
Anyway.
it is. Okay, very good. All right, thank you. All right, Brian, did you have some questions that you wanted to read for the audience, from the audience?
Sure,
Actually,
Ken, do you want?
Brian, I'm going to jump in real quick and respond to one of the questions, but also in the interest of time, I just want to make sure to get this out before. I think everybody's welcome to stay. We don't need to close at the top of the hour, but some of you may have programmed that into your days. But just real quickly, I did want to make the point that although we were speaking about leadership sims and we were talking about, leadership, the same applies into teachers. And as David mentioned, and as others have mentioned, the classroom has a similar vein and in terms of the need of experience. And so I think the same kinds of evidence, if you will, would manifest with those students as well, or participants, whether they're in universities or in the buildings. One question that came up from Davis is about how the sims are created. And I did want to use that as a jumping point to both highlight something that Sarah mentioned early on in terms of, wouldn't it be great if we could, the compelling topics that you want to cover, and what Mike referenced in terms of, the overlap with healthcare in terms of, these are experiences you need to have prior to going into the classroom. I don't know about assessing them, right? Because so many of these things are contextual. It's having the experience that's important rather than doing it right per se. Because again, that situation can manifest differently depending on your circumstance. But we partner on the development of every simulation with collaborators. We have a number of collaborators in the audience today, highlighting Gretchen McAllister from NAU, who we've done our initial partnering for the Teacher Sims Library. But all of the sims are sourced from the field. They're all inspired by real, authentic experiences, because we want them to be recognizable. We want them to be something that are eminently relatable. It's not my building, but it could be. They're not my people, and we use video and text because they're not my people, but they could be, because that makes it so that we can see ourselves in the action. And as everybody has stated, actually be involved conceptually, cognitively in decision-making, in emotionally based decision-making, right? So in terms of being provocative. And so all of them are, and there's an opportunity to be part of that process. We invite you all. And in fact, our next webinar that we're excited to announce, which will be next month, that you'll be getting information about, relates to actually inviting you into that process of designing a sim. Because sometimes, and we've heard this from our collaborators, the process of thinking through a problem in a manner which can be simulated is developmental as well. Because we begin to see things, we begin to see the nuances that are there, whether it's because of the context that they're in or because of the trade-offs that are at play. Actually articulating those elements can also be very powerful. So we're going to actually do that in a webinar interactively. I will be having a conversation with a recently retired superintendent, Dave Versteg, and we're going to actually design a sim with input from participants. So invite you to look for that. That's coming. But it's to really give people some insight into that process of how it begins. And watch for that. And it's delightful to have you all here, but I do want to turn it back to the panel in terms of addressing any other questions that you would like to respond to.
Actually, Ken, that was the last pedagogy point that I was forgot as I was on the speaking here, is like to have your students author them. I'm doing that right now, and it's been very engaging for them and very powerful experience. So I'll be at that webinar, and I hope all of you will be there too.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yes, I put up the contact information for everyone in case you are interested in following up. And of course, I think that was listed maybe in what got sent out. And there's some things appearing in the chat for registration in case that intrigues you. But I think there's one other slide, a simulation workshop. Was that something, Kent,
that's what's coming. That's the webinar. So.
Okay, very good. So let me ask you to join me in thanking everyone who is a panelist today, and thanking all of you for attending and being interested in our work. It's always a pleasure when you find like-minded spirits, people that care about things that you care about, and I appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to show us that and listen. I think that concludes the end of what we had planned. If people want to stick around, maybe the panelists will stay on just a little longer too, in case you want to ask a question, but we understand if people need to go. Lots of thank yous in the chat in case anyone's not monitoring that. Many people are very appreciative, so good job.
Yeah, and I had a kind of a global question if we got a minute.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Just curious, this is Dan Ray from right outside of Atlanta. And as I mentioned in the chat box earlier, we've used the Sims for about 5 years and love them. We use them. Matter of fact, our next seminar is Monday night. We use them, our Leadership Academy. But I guess my question is, have any of you on the panel, or really anybody else, have you heard of Cognia's Leadership Circle? We have a virtual meeting coming up with them, and I just was going to see if any of you have heard of that particular resource. So I'll pause there and listen
I
out.
haven't. Anyone else? I think I've seen that brand before, but I haven't seen their work.
Okay.
They were in the healthcare space for a while, but I didn't think that they'd really moved into K-12.
Well, they are the ones who now that's SACS, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. They do accreditation over on the eastern side of the southeastern side of the US.
Sorry, I don't think we can offer any insight. Tell us, report back what you learned.
Okay.
Anyone else have something they wanted to share or ask? Got everybody here. Yeah, Steve, please.
I missed the first couple of minutes and you may have hit this already. And I already hit the link to the library of simulations. To your earlier question, what does the field need to do to, in a sense, scale up in these areas? Would one or more of the panelists want to comment on the adequacy and depth of the library at this point? One can imagine these simulations being proliferated over many, many years as we think about. I like Mike's mention of low incidence, high mortality incidents. We've all known enough principals who have lost their jobs over a low incident event to think about there is an analog to mortality in the principalship as well. So in any case, what would one of the panelists or more want to comment on? Where are we in terms of the depth of the simulation resources that are now available for us for in-service and pre-service development of leaders?
Yeah. Dave, I know you have used pretty much every single simulation. You might be the best one to respond to that.
Yep. So I have used all the simulations and I love them. Right now, there are more than 35 sims in the library. And, when I started using them, there was just 14. So that kind of tells you the progression, and we're learning how to make them faster and more efficient. And we're looking at the data of like how, which ones are most popular. And one of the things that comes up is the ones with interpersonal conflict. So when you have conflict in the simulation going back and forth with somebody, those are going to be growing, I predict. Also, I just pulled up on my screen right now, I logged in, School Sims has a portal, which was new about 3 or 4 years ago. And as the simulation library grows, they now have a sorting tool that you can sort by the protagonist or the standard. Some states are aligning the simulations to their state standards, or the PECL standards, or the National Educational Leadership Preparation standards, or the CAPE standards. And what that does for the user is, when I'm deciding which sim to use, I think to myself, what are my goals for this group of people? What do I really want to accomplish in this 1 hour? And then I'll do a sorting feature, and it will remind me of the 7 simulations that are connected to my goals. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. I remember, like, that'll be the perfect one that I'm going to use. So that gives you a little bit of like an explanation of the depth and breadth, and also making sure that all the standards are covered, and then being able to sort them easily.
And I actually, if I can also add to that, one of the things, Steve, is to remember that David has the benefit of actually having used many of them, so he can filter, and that's important. But when we look at that, the idea of the core experiences that Mike mentioned that we want people to have, we don't necessarily need to have, one thing we want to stay away from is designing, we have an experience for that, right? That here's your opportunity to do that. Because the problem is that may not happen, but something just like that will happen. And we don't want to get people caught in that box of, I only know how to handle it when it's this way, right? That's how we differentiate between sim for assessment and sim for development, right? I can assess you on how you dealt with this, but does that mean you can extrapolate to that doesn't look the same, whether it's a different stakeholder, whether it manifests differently. I worked with David once where we did a session for superintendents in Arizona, and he chose the goal was focused on board relations, and he actually used the disruptive teacher simulation, which was about interpersonal conflict when you're dealing with a teacher bully, and was able to very easily have the participants, they were engaged in the sim because they all remember what the classroom was like. They all remember what that staff member might be like, who was probably closer to being under them than a colleague. But they all could extrapolate from that bully to the bully they have on their board. And so being able to make sure, and we're interested in the feedback from the field to make sure we capture those kinds of, that's the list we're trying to get at, right? What are those things that really, again, the low incidence, high mortality, right? We want to make sure we capture enough of those things that have the analog, focusing on that analog, not the mortality part, but the idea that these are the kinds of things, look, whether it's a parent, whether it's a staff member, whether it's an administrator, whether it's an activist who is unrelated, you're going to have to deal with stuff. And what's important is your ability to respond, not react, but to respond, and to enable people to practice in that way. So, but thanks for the question.
If I could just a quick thing, because I think it's a lot of the sim development has been arisen because people needed one, or we had partners and so forth. So this idea of how to look at it overall as it grows, and as Dave was pointing out, that it now is you can sort. I mean, it's great to be at a point where you have to sort, and that you have a capacity to link it to various kinds of standards. But I think part of the question is depth according to what criteria. So the professional standard certainly gives you something. But I also am very interested in if we really pushed on this notion of what's the dozen experiences, or pick another number, that you think every first-year principal ought to have done and feel confident in navigating before they step into that position. Let's, as a field, decide on that and then work backwards to simulate those and give people an opportunity to do that. So that's my first. I think we need to be, because we had resisted. Or at least I resisted earlier on. There were some folks who were very interested in sims and immediately wanted to align it to the sort of the assessments, the license kinds of tests and so forth. And we resisted that because of what Ken was saying. It's not like, oh, take 2 of these in the morning and you'll be good with that standard kind of thing. All right. So we want to get at the underlying capacity. But that, to Sarah's point earlier, means we have to take seriously the challenge of measuring what we think is capacity underneath it. And other fields do go after that. How do we measure that decision making in the moment kind of capacity? And is there a way to know whether or not somebody's capacity gets better than others? You have long experience, I know, in principal development. Years of experience don't guarantee you good judgment. But we know something about what does, I suppose. So can we get at that more directly? And I think that's part of the next sort of generation of work that will then support and help us figure out which sims help us develop which aspects of judgment. Anyway, that's my initial.
So my question is, I've heard y'all talk about it. So how do I experience, how do I see this and experience it in action? This is the first time I've been on this webinar. So who would I talk to about?
Tell him where he can look at one of the sample ones.
Yeah, we're happy to. We'll reach out to you and enable you. We'll take you through one, let you play one to try it out. Even as was mentioned earlier, as Trent said, doing is what's important. Trying it out, having an experience, and we will make sure that we put that in your hands. It's myself or Brian and our team. We will be in touch with you and make sure that you have that opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I'm thrilled so many of you stuck around and want to just like see what else is getting added. What's going on?
Yeah. Sarah, I think I'll keep this short because not everybody wants to hang on forever like I do right now. But I think that, I mean, one of the issues this raises is the comment that somebody made earlier about the use of Sims in teacher prep, coupling it with student teaching, and the Sims was used as, in a way, preparation for student. And it raises the issue that how we do this in leadership prep is really complicated with respect to how it integrates with other aspects of a program. For example, in one program, it might be a complete substitute for a fully released online residency, a fully released residency, a 1-year residency or a 2-year residency, as we have in Illinois and in at least 2 districts. And so my point here is that theorizing and practicing with respect to how does the Sims fit into the academic learning, how does it fit into the clinical experience, what is it a substitute for, can it be used for assessment as well as development, and so forth and so on. All of those seem to me to be just terrific questions for theory and practice. So, and all of them have been raised directly or indirectly today. So I really appreciate the depth of this discussion in just a short hour.
Yeah, it'll be indicative of the growing pains, if you will, to talk about the preferred or better or appropriate uses. Right now, we're trying to just help people understand there's a tool out there that we know from research not very many people are using, and it offers some benefits. And we think that more people should be, thinking about where to appropriately place it in the learning sequence.
That's right.
And I don't think it should supplant anything else, but I do believe it's a powerful supplement.
Yep.
I was just going to say, and nursing a number of years ago, I think it goes back to about 2014, had this question. I mean, they always seem to have an issue when there's a new need for a lot more nurses. There's a challenge of giving them placements. Who's going to take on the new nurses and so forth, especially with the pressures for the economics of healthcare and so forth. So they did a very large randomized control trial to see whether or not, what's the highest percentage you could get to on replacing practicum experience with simulations, while gauging all sorts of other kinds of outcomes, including peer evaluations and cognitive, assessments and all sorts of kinds of things. Now, there's some follow-up controversy with who likes what about the data and so forth. So I can send you the study if you're interested. Of course, every study has that, but it was a large-scale study, and it was used, and they got to their limit, which was 50%. 50% replacement of nursing placements, and they found same or better outcomes for nurses, at least in the gauges that they had. So it was a powerful impetus to the field to say, wow, this has to be, we have to take seriously this. We're not necessarily doing a trade-off between quality and the simulated activity. Obviously, there's some things you need in-person kinds of interactions and so forth, but it gave coverage in a way that they didn't.
It'd be interesting to see that, Mike, with respect to research on airline pilot training. Simulations are absolutely critical in airline pilot training, but no one would recommend supplanting flying a plane entirely with simulations. So what's the balance and what's the relationship between the two becomes a question that I hope we as a field really take seriously, so.
Yeah, agree.
And in extraneous to what we think and would recommend as best practices, there are external forces occurring, and whether it's policy changes or just demand for teachers and or leaders, totally online universities allowing that, and it's passing with their accreditation processes in their states, which we know vary considerably. So the data are needed to understand what kind of tool, when, who benefits from this, when, under what conditions, to what extent, the classic research. And I think in my mind, this is my opinion, the thing that is inhibiting our research is that we don't have really good ideas about what is good leadership. I mean, we do in a general way, but not in a specific way that matches with how it could be used as a measurement tool. And until we have, I mean, we have practices, they fall into domains and to dimensions, and, we could all cite a few of those important studies. But, when faced with a new situation and the exercise of judgment and so forth, there's a little bit of a lack that allows us to create a really good outcome measure. So you heard from today, oh, people are engaged, they have greater self-efficacy, they have confidence and certainty in their actual decision, and they're drawing upon particular data. I mean, that's what we turn to because it's not quite clear how to develop all those measures. And if they were all sitting out there for us, and nursing and medicine, I have a little easier time because there's a correct, incorrect way, patient will die, patient will die, Trent, did I just see you waving your hand like me? I want to weigh in on that.
Me, there was a fly.
I see.
No, I just appreciate the questions and the insights today. I always learn something every single time, and again, just have really appreciated being able to use the Sims, and really excited about some of the new ones coming as well.
And I will just point out, and Stephen, in terms of your questions and what you were pointing out to, is we're not, as school Sims, we're not researchers, but I think as you've been able to see, we're very interested in supporting the research, and I think that Sims as a modality, as an approach, allows for getting at some of those different things that Sarah was just mentioning, right? In terms of, it's difficult to capture that in a survey. It's difficult to capture that in an observation or a focus group alone, but actually putting people into that space, but in a scalable way, is their engagement, right? So that's first, right? Are they engaging, from the standpoint of, are we imagining ourselves in that? And David, I think, can report to you that, at least on a small scale, right? He had a student that actually was expressed to him that she was experiencing symptoms of PTSD in going through the pandemic sim because of what it provoked, not because the sim was so whatever. It's because of what's in here and how we get at that. And so if there is interest, and for those who are here and hopefully in the recording, interested in taking advantage of that and utilizing Sims, as we're doing with Jennifer, as we've done with everybody else, we're interested partners in that process of enabling the tools into a formulated research interest and working with you on that. So I do want to put that out there, that if that is of interest, we are more than happy to talk with you about that and to enable that to move forward, again, from a designed area of interest that you have as a researcher. Well, I think that at this point, we're going to call it.
Okay.
So I wanted to thank Sarah and thank the panel, all of you,
Yes, thanks,
for our
everyone.
work together and for the panel, obviously, and for the research that you're doing, which, as I think has been stated, we all agree is very important to the field. This is the business of education is too challenging and too important to not be attending to more in every way we can. So I applaud, certainly we applaud your work, and enjoy, we will enjoy hopefully continuing to work together with you and supporting your efforts as well as the activities in the field. So thank you all.
Yes,
And-
thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Good to see
everyone.
you. Good to
Thanks,
see you.
everybody.
Take care.
Good job.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, we're down to just us.